We were far upriver, in a part of the Amazon where the maps turn pale and the names on them mean less than what the local people call things. Villages were far apart. The river bent and twisted through endless green. Every bend looked the same until you learned to read the tiny differences in the banks, in the trees, and the sound of the water. In one small stilt house on the river, we stopped for fuel and food. The family there knew us. We drank thick, sweet coffee together. We sat on the rough wooden floor and talked about the river levels, the fishing, the latest storms. At some point, as always, the conversation drifted to animals. Caiman, tapir, giant river otters, jaguars, and then snakes. The old man of the house, a grandfather with hands like twisted roots and eyes that had seen more floods than I had years on this planet, listened quietly while his grandsons talked about anacondas they had seen near the village. 4 meters, 5 meters, big snakes, but nothing out of the ordinary for the forest. Then he put down his cup and said, very simply, "You have never seen the one in the headwater swamp." Everyone went quiet. He told us about a place several hours away by small boat, then another stretch on foot through flooded forest, a forgotten arm of the river that ended in a wide, shallow swamp choked with plants and fallen trees. In that swamp, he said, there lived one enormous female anaconda, bigger than any snake he had ever heard of, big enough that when she moved, the whole surface of the swamp shifted, big enough that the tapirs avoided that place, that the black caimans gave it respect. He said that once, when he was a young man, he had gone in after her with other hunters. They had tried to kill her. 3 men ended up bitten and nearly drowned. They never went back. She is still there, he said, old now, dangerous. That swamp is hers. Now, you hear a lot of wild stories out here. Hunters love to exaggerate. Snakes grow a meter every time the tale is told. But the way he spoke, quiet and flat, not trying to impress us, just stating a fact, got under my skin. I looked at my friend who knew this region better than I did. He gave me a look that said, without words, that he had heard about this swamp too, from other people, in other villages. The story did not belong to just one man. That was how it started. We decided to go. The next morning, we left before dawn. The sky was still dark and full of stars when we pushed the canoe off the bank. The river was low, the air cool and full of mist that clung to the water. Our outboard motor whispered us upstream, following the bend after bend after bend. Slowly, the light came. First a deep blue over the trees, then a pale gray, then a thin line of gold along the eastern horizon. Birds began to wake. Parrots screeched. A heron lifted off the bank and flew ahead of us, its wings slow and heavy. After several hours, we turned into a narrow, almost invisible channel on the left side of the river. The entrance was choked with branches and floating plants. If you did not know it was there, you would pass right by. The big river sound faded behind us. The motor cut off. We took up paddles. The water here was very still, dark, but not deep. Tree trunks rose straight out of it, their roots hidden under the surface. Vines hung down like ropes. The air was thicker, full of the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. We moved in single file, pushing aside branches, paddling slowly between the trunks. Every splash sounded too loud. Every drop of water falling from a leaf seemed like someone whispering. The old man had told us to watch for a particular tree, a huge one with buttress roots so wide you could have slept in their curves. When we saw it, he said, we would know we were close. After what felt like a long time, there it was. The tree rose out of the water like the pillar of a drowned cathedral, its roots spread out in great fins. The trunk was covered in moss, and small orchids clung to the bark. Around its base, the water was a little more open, as if even the smaller trees kept their distance. We tied the canoe to one of the roots and climbed out onto a narrow strip of soggy ground. From there, we walked. If you have never walked through flooded forest, it is hard to describe. Every step is a surprise. One foot lands on something solid, the next sinks knee-deep into mud. Sometimes the ground vanishes entirely, and you find yourself waiting. Sometimes you are on a half-submerged log that rolls under your weight. We move slowly, feeling with our feet, using sticks to test the depth ahead. The swamp opened in front of us like a shallow lake, but a lake that was almost completely covered with plants. Floating mats of green leaves stretched in all directions. Fallen branches and trunks crisscrossed just under the surface. The water was the color of weak coffee. You could not see more than a hand length below. This was the place, the headwater swamp. It was strange. I have been in many lakes and swamps in the Amazon. They feel alive, full of movement and sound. Fish jumping, birds calling, insects buzzing. This place felt quieter, not dead, just tense, like the air in a room where something important is about to happen. We stood on the edge for a while, just listening. A dragonfly zipped past my face. Somewhere, far away, a monkey gave a short bark. A single kingfisher flashed blue across the water, then vanished into the trees. My heart was already beating faster. I knew what we were here to do. We stripped down to clothes that would not catch on branches. We checked our belts, our masks, our ropes. We talked through the plan again. We were here to find this snake, to see if the stories were true, to measure her if we could, to prove, at least to ourselves, what lived in this swamp. But under all of that, for me, there was something else. I wanted to meet her, not as a trophy, as a presence. We stepped into the water. It came up to our shins, then our thighs, then our waists. It was cooler than the air, and full of tiny bits of floating plant matter that stuck to our skin. The bottom was a mix of soft mud and hidden branches that bumped our feet and shins. Everywhere around us, floating mats of plants shifted as we moved. They brushed against our stomachs and arms. In some places, we had to push them aside with both hands to make a path. We moved in a line, spaced out, each person no more than an arm length from the next, so that if anything happened, we could grab each other quickly. One of the local guys led the way. He had grown up in these waters. He knew how to read the small signs. A patch where the plants sat lower, a place where bubbles rose from below, a curve in the way the sunlight hit the surface. We searched like that for a long time. Every so often we would see something, a fish darting away, a turtle slipping off a log. Once, the head of a smaller anaconda, maybe 3 meters long, sticking out from under the plants. She looked at us, tongue flicking, then slid away into deeper water. But not the giant, not the one we had come for. We were starting to get tired. Moving slowly through water is like walking through a dream where everything pulls back at you. Your legs ache in ways you do not feel on dry land. Your lower back starts to complain. The sun climbed higher, and the air above the swamp turned hot and heavy. Part of me began to wonder if the old stories were just that, stories. Maybe the big female had died years ago. Maybe all that was left were a few ordinary snakes and the memory of one impossible animal. Then something changed. It was nothing dramatic, no wave breaking the surface, no bird screaming alarm. It was a feeling. The swamp went quieter. The few little ripples we had been seeing seemed to fade. The insects along the edge slowed their chorus. Even the air itself felt thicker. The man in front of me stopped. He lifted his hand slowly, palm back toward us, the universal sign for hold still. I froze. He was looking straight ahead, not at anything I could see, but through the plants toward the darker center of the swamp. Very gently, he lowered his hand into the water and extended it. His fingers disappeared under the floating leaves, his arm tensed. Then he whispered one single word. There. I followed his gaze, squinting. At first, it was just more plants, the same flat green carpet. Then my eyes caught an almost invisible hump in the surface, a long, smooth rise, like a buried log lying just under the water, running at a diagonal across our path. I stared at that shape. It did not move. It was too perfect, too straight, too thick. I took a slow breath. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "That is her," he said quietly. Everything in my body woke up at once. It was like a switch flipped. The shape under the plants was only part of her body. You could see where it disappeared into deeper water where the plants sat undisturbed. Just that visible section was longer than many full-grown snakes I had handled before. We moved closer, step by careful step, until we were only a few arm lengths away. Up close, I could see it more clearly. The plants had a different texture over her back. They rode higher, then dipped suddenly where her sides fell away. Here and there, between the leaves, I caught flashes of dark olive green, patterned with even darker, almost black spots. She lay there completely still. An anaconda can stay underwater for a very long time. It can lie in the mud, holding its breath, waiting. From above, it looks like nothing, just part of the swamp. We had to decide what we were going to do. We had two choices. We could stand there, look at the snake from a distance and say, yes, there is a giant in this swamp, and leave. Or we could try to catch her. To bring her gently up, control her head and body, measure her, and then let her go. I will be honest with you. Part of me wanted to back away. She was clearly enormous. The water was deep in places, full of hidden branches. If she wrapped someone up and pulled them under, we would have only our hands and a small rope to change that story. But this was why we had come. We talked quickly, quietly. We would come at her from the side, not from the head or tail. A couple of us would try to get control of her neck. Others would grab wherever we could along her body to stop her from whipping away. No one would go alone. No one would let her wrap around their chest or neck. If anything felt wrong, we would let go and back off, and we would respect her. Always that, respect. We took one more breath together, the way people do before they lift something very heavy. Then we went. The last few steps were sudden. Once we committed, we had to move fast. Plants pushed aside, mud surged up around our legs. The visible shape of her back came right up in front of us. I reached down into the water with both hands, fingers sliding between stems and leaves, feeling blindly for where the hump turned into something solid. The first touch was like grabbing a moving tree trunk. Her skin was smooth, cool, and hard with muscle. I felt the ridges of her scales under my palms. I slid my hands along, trying to find where her body narrowed toward the neck. At that same instant, she woke up. The calm shape under the water turned into a violent, twisting force. The surface exploded. Plants flew into the air. Water smashed into my face. For a moment, I could not see anything, just green and brown and white foam. Her body whipped around, and suddenly there were coils everywhere. Around my legs, around my waist, around my left arm. It was like being dropped into a river of muscle. People shouted. The words did not matter. It was all instinct and motion. I managed to get my right hand up along her body and, by some miracle, found the thick base of her neck. Someone else, on the other side, slid their arm under and grabbed higher, closer to the head. Her jaws snapped, just once, at the surface, teeth clicking on nothing. We pushed her head away from our bodies and locked in. Then the fight truly started. It is hard to describe what it feels like to hold a snake that large. Her body did not feel like a rope. It felt like several strong men all moving at once under your hands. Every time she flexed, the water around us heaved. I felt the pressure increase around my legs as one of her coils wrapped my thigh. It was not a deliberate constriction, not yet. It was her trying to get leverage, to find purchase in the chaos. But even that was enough to make my muscles burn. We shouted instructions. Someone grabbed the coil around my legs and pulled it away. Someone else got another section of her body under their arms. For every piece of her we controlled, there seemed to be two more sections trying to get free. She spun, and I lost my footing. For a second, I went under. The swamp filled my mouth and nose. All I could see was brown water and the pale undersides of leaves. Underneath, in that murk, I felt her body slide across my chest. Heavy, immense. One thought cut through everything else. If she gets a good rap, this is over. Hands grabbed the back of my shirt and hauled me up. I came out of the water gasping, coughing, still hanging onto her neck with one hand, eyes full of mud. We adjusted. We spread out. We used our weight, not just our strength. We leaned backward, away from her, using the water as resistance. Slowly, the wildest part of the thrashing began to ease. Not because she was weak, but because she realized, I think, that we were not letting go, and that going forward was not going to be easy. We got her head safely pointed away from us. We lifted, just enough to see more of her body. She was colossal. Even half supported by the water, she felt impossibly heavy. Her girth at the thickest point was wider than my chest. Her body seemed to go on forever. From the head of my hand, down past one person, then another, then another. People had to shuffle aside to support all of her. We did not have the luxury of dragging her to shore. The swamp bottom was too treacherous, full of submerged logs and holes, so we measured her the way we could. One of us took a long rope and ran it carefully from the tip of her snout down along the full reach of her body, trying to keep it as straight as possible in that mess of plants and water. Another person held the tail, keeping it within the line. All the while I could feel her breathing. Yes, snakes breathe. You can feel their muscles move, their ribs expanding and contracting. In that moment, with my hand just behind her head, I felt each breath like a slow, angry wave under her skin. She was not calm, but she was not panicking either. She was trying to understand what these strange, clumsy animals in her swamp were doing. Finally, the rope reached the end of her tail. We pinched it and made a knot at that point. We did not shout the number. We did not have the number yet. The rope was just a line soaked with swamp water, marked with a small knot and held in shaking hands. We took a moment. Then, together, we let her go. It is amazing how fast a snake that big can vanish. 1 second, she was the solid, heavy presence in our arms. The next, she twisted once, twice, and simply poured herself back into the swirl of plants. Water splashed up around us. Our feet sank deeper into the mud as her coils pushed off the bottom. In a heartbeat, she was gone. The only sign she had been there was a wide, slowly closing path through the floating leaves, and the pounding of our hearts in our ears. We stood there, soaked, covered in mud and bits of plant, laughing with that wild, breathless laughter that comes when you realize that you are still alive after doing something very, very intense. It was only back on firmer ground, later, that we measured the rope. We strung it out along a fallen trunk, pulling it straight, knot at one end, tail end at the other. We brought out a measuring tape and ran it along. I remember the number. I will not say it here like some kind of contest. What mattered was this. She was beyond any snake I had ever measured before. She was in that upper range where the stories live. Not a myth, not a rumor. A real, huge, wild animal that we had held in our hands and then returned to her world. But the length, the exact centimeters, the possible record, that was not what stayed with me. What stayed was the feeling in that swamp. Because here is the thing. We call her the most dangerous anaconda I have ever met. But the danger was not just in the snake. It was in the combination, her size, her strength, the fact that she owned that swamp completely, the remote location, hours from even the smallest clinic, the water full of hidden branches that could pin a person under if they slipped, the exhaustion in our muscles. The way, for a few seconds, the world narrowed to nothing but coils and mud and lungs struggling for air. If any one of those things had gone a little more wrong, if a foot had caught under a root at the wrong moment, if she had wrapped fully around someone's chest instead of just a leg, if fear had made us let go in the worst possible way, that swamp would have kept a secret forever. People sometimes imagine that animals are out to get us, that anacondas want to hunt humans, that they lie in wait with some plan. That is not how it felt. To me, she was a queen in her own flooded kingdom. For decades, maybe, she had hunted there. Fish, birds, capybara, caiman, maybe even a tapir once, in a wild burst of power. She had grown huge on that rich diet, protected by all the things that make the swamp hard for us to move in. We were the clumsy ones. We were the fragile ones, flailing and splashing and trying to understand a world we only visit. When I think of her now, lying somewhere at the bottom of that swamp, her body draped over sunken logs, her head resting on mud, eyes half closed, I do not think of a monster. I think of an old, powerful presence that tolerated our small, noisy intrusion and then returned to a life we can barely imagine. After that encounter, the swamp felt different. The next day, when we went back in just to look, we did not step into the water. We stood at the edge and watched the plants move in tiny, almost invisible ways. A dragonfly landed on a leaf. A butterfly danced over the surface. Somewhere beneath, she was there, or maybe in another corner of her territory, sliding through dark channels. We said thank you out loud. To the place. To her. To the forest that had allowed us to come back out. Then we left. We paddled away through the flooded forest, past the huge buttress tree, back into the narrow channel that led to the river. The light on the water was bright. Birds were busy. The big river looked wide and safe after that enclosed, watching swamp, but I carried that swamp with me. At night, back in camp, lying in a hammock, I would close my eyes and feel again the cold, smooth weight of her body under my hands, the sudden surge of power when she woke, the press of water against my chest as I went under, the strange calm that came afterward, standing knee-deep in the swamp, knowing I had shared space with something so old, so strong, and still so unknown. The most dangerous anaconda I have ever met was dangerous because she reminded me, in a very direct way, that out there, we are not in charge. We like to think we are. We have motors and metal boats and measuring tapes. We have cameras and notebooks and plans. But in that swamp, in that moment, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was respect. Respect for a colossal snake that could have ended that day very differently. Respect for the local people who had warned us, who had told us those stories not to scare us, but to teach us. Respect for the forest itself, which gives life and takes it away in ways that do not care about our pride. So as you lie there now, breathing slowly, maybe with your eyes closed, I want you to picture that swamp. A flat green surface, quiet and still, tree trunks rising all around, their reflections trembling in the dark water, a thin mist hanging low in the morning, a single kingfisher perched on a branch, watching. Underneath, hidden from sight, a massive anaconda rests, her body coiled in slow loops, her head resting gently on one of her own coils. Her eyes are open, but calm. The water around her is cool and dark. Fish brush past her scales. Tiny bubbles rise from the mud. She is not thinking about breaking records or frightening people. She is simply being what she is. A living part of an ancient swamp at the very heart of the Amazon. Somewhere, far away, people are driving in traffic, sitting under electric lights, staring at screens. Somewhere, a city never really sleeps.